I told you never to call him again." The voice sliced through the air like a blade. Sharp, angry, unrelenting. Malcolm Reeves had barely stepped into the foyer of his lakefront estate in Seattle when he froze. The sound wasn't just a raised voice. It was venom. And it was coming from upstairs. The late afternoon sun poured through the skylight, casting warm light over the marble floors. He was holding a small box, a handmade leather bracelet he'd picked up from a street vendor in San Francisco. A gift for his daughter, Zoey. But now, his grip loosened. The box slipped from his hand, landing with a dull thud on the floor. Then came another sound. Softer. Fragile. A child's voice, barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say good night to Daddy." His pulse kicked into overdrive. He didn't speak. He didn't shout. He ran. The click of his boots against the oak staircase echoed like gunshots. Up one flight, then another. Toward the sound. Toward her. Zoe's door was cracked open. Malcolm pushed it gently. And what he saw, what he heard, would stay with him forever. Zoey, just 9 years old, curled into the corner of her bed, clinging to her stuffed lion like it was the only thing holding her together. Her hair was messy, damp with sweat and tears. Her eyes, big, brown, terrified, locked onto the woman standing over her. Susan, the housekeeper who'd been with Malcolm's family for over a decade. "You think just because he brought you here you belong?" She sneered, arms crossed. "You're not his daughter. You're a favor. A project. And one day, he's gonna wake up and realize what a mistake you are." Malcolm stepped into the room. He didn't slam the door. He didn't scream. His voice was low, icy, final. "Leave this house. Now." Susan turned, pale, stammering. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't." Now. He didn't even look at her. Because Zoey was shaking. Because his daughter had been crying alone. And because Malcolm Reeves, billionaire CEO, world-renowned philanthropist, had just realized he'd failed the one person who needed him most. Malcolm didn't move at first. He stood there, rooted in the doorway of his daughter's room, watching Susan disappear down the hallway like smoke that never should have been in the house to begin with. The sound of her footsteps faded, but the echo of her words clung to the walls. "You're a project. He's gonna realize what a mistake you are." Zoey hadn't looked up. She was still tucked into the corner of the bed, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tight around her lion. Her small frame trembled with every breath. Malcolm could see the tear stains on her cheeks. He could see the fear in her body, like she was bracing for the next hit, even though none ever came. He crossed the room slowly and knelt beside her. "Zoey," he whispered. "Nothing." He reached out, gently brushing a curl away from her forehead. Her eyes flicked toward him, unsure. Then, recognition, relief, pain. And all at once, she let go of the lion and launched into his arms, burying her face into his chest. He held her like she was made of glass. His arms wrapped tight, one hand resting on the back of her head, the other pressed firmly against her back like he could shield her from the world just by being there. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't mean to make her mad." He pulled back just enough to see her face. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby." "Nothing. But she said if I kept calling you, if I kept needing you, you'd stop loving me." Malcolm's heart shattered in slow motion. He had built empires, sat across tables from presidents and kings, made billion-dollar decisions with the flick of a pen. But in that moment, all the power in the world meant nothing, because his daughter had been living under his roof, scared of needing her own father. He carried her downstairs. No staff, no noise, just the two of them. He made her a grilled cheese sandwich and warmed up a bowl of tomato soup. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't catered. It was what he used to make for himself in college when the nights were long and the cupboards were nearly empty. She ate in silence, her hand never leaving his. That night, as Malcolm sat on the edge of her bed, watching her drift into uneasy sleep, he made a promise, not out loud, not yet, but deep in his bones. He would never let her feel alone in her own home again. Not ever. The next morning, the sun broke through the fog like a quiet apology. Malcolm had barely slept. He sat in the oversized leather chair beside Zoe's bed, still in yesterday's shirt, the sleeves wrinkled, his tie loose around his neck. He hadn't meant to stay there all night, but every time Zoe's breath hitched, every time she whimpered in her sleep, he whispered the same words again and again. "You're safe, baby. Daddy's right here." Around 7 a.m., she finally slept peacefully. Malcolm stood, stretched his stiff back, and walked downstairs to make breakfast. He wasn't a regular in the kitchen, not anymore, but his hands still remembered. Eggs, bacon, a short stack of pancakes. He moved through the kitchen in silence, letting the smell of warmth and sugar fill the house. When Zoey woke up, she came down slowly, wearing her favorite blue pajama set and dragging her lion behind her. Her curls were wild from sleep, her eyes still puffy. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, sunshine." She offered a soft smile, then climbed up onto the tall stool at the kitchen island. He set a plate in front of her, cut into triangles, just how she liked it. Halfway through her second piece, she looked up and asked, "Is she gone?" He nodded. "Susan won't be coming back." There was a pause. Zoey looked down at her plate. "She said this house wasn't made for people like me." Malcolm stopped mid-sip of his coffee. He set the mug down slowly, then walked around the island, knelt beside her, and took her hand. "Zoey, this house doesn't define you. You define this house. Your laugh, your paintings, your music, your favorite socks that never match. All of that, that's what makes this a home." She blinked, as if trying to believe him. "And you belong here more than anyone else ever has." Zoey opened her mouth, then closed it again. She nodded slowly, but something still lingered in her eyes. Later that afternoon, while Malcolm was sorting mail in his study, he found a folded piece of purple paper tucked into one of Zoey's notebooks. Her handwriting was unmistakable, rounded, careful, with little hearts over the eyes. It was a list, titled, "Things I Must Not Do, So Daddy Doesn't Leave." 1. Talk too loud. 2. Ask too many questions. 3. Touch the walls with dirty hands. 4. Cry without a reason. 5. Call Daddy while he's working. 6. Tell anyone if I feel scared. At the bottom, in even smaller writing, "If I break these, she might come back. And Daddy might get mad. Or leave. Or both." Malcolm sat down hard in the chair. The weight of those words crushed the air from his lungs. This wasn't just discipline gone too far. This was fear carved into habit. His daughter, had been surviving her childhood like it was a minefield. He placed the paper down gently, like it might break. Then he stood, pulled out his phone, and called Noah, his longtime assistant. "I need to find someone. A therapist. Someone who works with kids. And they need to come here. I don't want Zoey walking into some cold office." "On it," Noah replied without hesitation. "Anyone specific?" Malcolm paused. His voice, when it came, was quieter. "Someone who knows what it's like to grow up unseen." It was Noah who found her. Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, a retired child psychologist, now in her early 60s, who had once led trauma recovery programs for children of deployed military families. She'd spent 3 decades helping kids navigate the weight of things they were never meant to carry. When she arrived at the Reeves estate 2 days later, she didn't come with a clipboard or a stiff suit. She wore a cozy green cardigan, a pair of soft-soled shoes, and carried a cloth tote bag covered in cat pins and faded protest buttons. Malcolm met her at the door. "Thank you for coming," he said, offering his hand. She looked him over with sharp, thoughtful eyes. "I'm not here for you, Mr. Reeves. I'm here for your daughter." Then she smiled. Warm. Real. "Let's get to work." They started simple. No office. No sessions with big words or sterile chairs. Just tea and cookies at the kitchen table. Zoey sat across from Dr. Rhodes, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. The woman didn't ask questions. Not at first. She told stories. About growing up in Georgia. About falling out of a tree and breaking her front tooth. About her dog Roosevelt, who barked at mailmen but made friends with squirrels. Zoey didn't say much, but her fingers stopped fidgeting. By the end of that first hour, she was smiling. Just barely, but it was real. When Malcolm peeked into the kitchen, he saw Zoey holding a pencil, drawing something quietly while Dr. Rhodes watched without interrupting. He turned away quickly, not wanting to disturb whatever was taking shape between them. Later that evening, Zoey showed him the drawing. It was a lion cub, sitting next to a tall figure in a hoodie and sneakers. "That's me," she said, pointing at the lion. "And that's you." Malcolm's chest tightened. "The lion looks scared," he said gently. Zoey nodded. "Yeah, but she's trying. And the guy, he has big hands. Safe hands." Malcolm didn't know what to say, so he said the only thing that mattered. "I love it." He placed the drawing on the fridge, right in the center, clearing space between a calendar and a real estate flyer. "You think it'll stay there?" Zoey asked. He turned to her, serious. "It's not going anywhere." And neither was he. 2 nights later, Malcolm couldn't sleep. He wandered the upstairs hallway barefoot, the house silent except for the low hum of the security system and the occasional creak of old wood settling. This place was massive. 10,000 square feet of glass, stone, and engineered perfection. But it didn't feel perfect. Not anymore. He stopped outside Zoey's room. Her door was cracked open, just enough for the soft glow of a nightlight to spill into the hallway. He could see the curve of her back under the blankets, the plush lion clutched close to her chest. She was safe. At least tonight. But for how long? Malcolm stared at the closed closet door just across from her room. A narrow linen closet, rarely used, wedged between a guest bathroom and the old staircase to the attic. Something about it had been bothering him for days. A feeling, nothing more. But he'd learned to trust his instincts. They were the reason he was still alive. Still standing. He opened it. Inside, shelves of towels, cleaning supplies, and 2 large storage bins. He crouched down, moved one aside, then another. Behind them, almost hidden, wedged into the corner like it was meant to be forgotten, was a cardboard box. Worn. Retaped. Labeled in black marker, miscellaneous. He pulled it out and sat on the floor. Inside were scraps of construction paper, broken crayons, a macaroni bracelet, and a folded card that read, "To Daddy. I love you even when you're gone." His throat tightened. At the bottom of the box was a post-it note. In Susan's handwriting. "Mr. Reeves, found this stuff while organizing the kids' room. Probably trash. You decide." Trash. She called it trash. His hands trembled as he held the note, then balled it up and dropped it beside him. This wasn't garbage. This was Zoey's voice. Her attempts to connect, to belong, to be seen. And somehow, this had sat in a forgotten closet, while he'd been busy chasing funding rounds and board meetings. He stared down at the macaroni bracelet, green and yellow, stretched out, imperfect, but clearly made with love. The kind of love a child offers without question. And he'd missed it. That night, Malcolm didn't go back to bed. Instead, he sat on the floor in front of that closet for nearly an hour, box in his lap, listening. Because suddenly, the house wasn't just echoing with silence. It was whispering everything he hadn't wanted to hear. The next morning, Malcolm walked into his home office with one thing on his mind. He didn't open his laptop, didn't check stock reports, didn't even pour his usual cup of black coffee. Instead, he picked up the phone and called Noah. "I need a full review of all the household staff," he said, his voice low and even. Noah didn't ask questions. He never had. "What am I looking for?" "Anything that doesn't feel right," Malcolm said. "Past complaints. Scheduling patterns. Internal memos. Any moment when cameras were off or someone raised concern, especially around Zoey's routines." There was a pause. "You think Susan wasn't the only one?" Noah asked quietly. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, staring out at the thick fog drifting between the trees behind the house. "I think I've been blind," he admitted. "And I'm done being blind." By that afternoon, Noah had compiled a file. Thick. Too thick. 3 staff members, all long-term, had red flags in their records. Not obvious ones. Nothing that screamed danger. But subtle, consistent cracks. One housekeeper had reportedly referred to Zoey as the foundation kid during a staff meeting, twice. Another had repeatedly redirected gifts from vendors meant for Zoey. Books, art supplies, handmade dolls, into the general donation pile for the company's outreach program. Every note had been logged. Every package. Every apology signed with tight, neutral language. The last, a driver who'd accidentally lost Zoey's school art folder. Twice. None of it was explosive. None of it was fireable by corporate standards. But Malcolm wasn't running a company right now. He was protecting his daughter. And in her world, those slights weren't small. They were shadows that hung over her sense of self, one whisper at a time. He printed the report, spread it out across his desk, and stared at the paper trail of microhertz that had built a silent wall around his little girl. This wasn't about bigotry that shouted. It was about the kind that whispered behind closed doors and smiled in public. Later that evening, he sat on the edge of Zoey's bed after tucking her in. Her lion was curled under one arm, her curls spilling across the pillow like ivy. "Daddy," she mumbled sleepily. "Yes, baby. Do you think people can be kind and still hurt you?" He thought about that. "Yes," he said finally. "Especially when they don't understand what kind looks like." She didn't answer, but her hand reached out, resting on his. He stayed there until her breathing softened. Then he rose, walked into his office, and drafted 3 letters. Handwritten, personal, direct, termination, no fanfare, no press, just accountability. By morning, the letters would be delivered, and 3 people would be quietly escorted off the estate, not because Malcolm wanted revenge, but because Zoey deserved a home where love wasn't filtered through filters and footnotes. She deserved to be safe, truly safe. And for the first time in a long time, Malcolm Reeves wasn't managing a mansion. He was reclaiming a home. The house was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was still, soft. Malcolm walked room to room the following weekend, seeing everything with different eyes. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking for elegance or symmetry or resale value. He was looking for signs of life, signs of her. And there were none. No finger paintings on the fridge. No framed art from 2nd grade. No growth chart scratched into a doorframe. For a home that claimed to raise a child, it had erased her presence like she was never really here. That stopped today. By Monday morning, he had a designer at the house. Not one of the high-profile names from his usual roster, but someone recommended by a friend in child development. He met her in the kitchen, coffee in hand, sketches already spread across the table. "I don't want a redesign," Malcolm said. "I want a restoration. Not of the wood or the walls, but of what this place should have been all along, a home." The designer, a warm woman named Tracy with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, nodded. "Tell me about your daughter." And he did. He told her about Zoey's love for drawing lions, her quiet habit of humming while she paints, how she likes to press flowers between books and tape glow-in-the-dark stars to her windows. By the end of the week, changes were already happening. One of Zoey's watercolor paintings, a stormy sunset with streaks of gold, was framed and hung above the living room fireplace. A bookshelf just her height was built into the hallway wall, filled with her favorite fantasy novels and graphic comics. The pantry door became a growth chart, etched with the first marking. Zoey, 9 years old, 4 feet 4 inches. May 2025. Even the guest bathroom had new towels in her favorite color, mint green. When Zoey noticed, she stood in the middle of the hallway, looking up at her painting, her mouth slightly open. "You hung it," she whispered. "It's a masterpiece," Malcolm said. She didn't speak, just walked to him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and held on. "This house looks different," she murmured. He bent to her level and smiled. "No," he said. "It finally looks like you live here." The house breathed differently now. There was color in the corners, life in the stillness, warmth in the walls. Zoey began to move through it like she belonged. Not cautiously, not like a guest in someone else's space, but with a growing sense of ease. She sang softly to herself again while brushing her teeth. She left her favorite sneakers by the front door without apology. She spilled glitter in the craft room and didn't try to hide it. And every time Malcolm saw it, the mess, the motion, the sound, he smiled. One night, she padded into his office after dinner, barefoot and sleepy, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "Can I draw in here?" she asked. He looked up from his laptop, surprised. Of course. She curled up on the floor near the fireplace and began sketching quietly, tongue poking out in concentration. Malcolm tried to return to his emails, but his eyes kept drifting to her, to the way her brow furrowed when she focused, the way she reached for the yellow crayon without looking. After a while, she looked up and said, "Daddy, do you think houses can feel things?" He set his laptop aside. "I think they feel the people in them." She nodded thoughtfully. "This house feels different now. Like it finally knows I'm here." He swallowed hard. "Maybe it didn't always know how to listen," he said. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, honest. "But you're listening now, right?" He crossed the room, knelt beside her, and cupped her cheek in one hand. "I hear you, Zoey. Loud and clear." She grinned and returned to her drawing, this time humming softly under her breath. Malcolm leaned back on his heels and exhaled, deeply. He had changed floor plans, replaced staff, hung artwork and painted hallways. But this quiet moment of trust, was the real renovation. Because for the first time in a long time, his daughter didn't just exist in the house. She lived in it. And more importantly, she knew she belonged. The calm didn't last forever. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when the call came in. Malcolm was reviewing architectural plans for a new wing at the Langston Youth Center when his phone buzzed. "Noah." "Hey," Malcolm answered, distracted. "You're gonna want to see this," Noah said. "Check your email." Seconds later, Malcolm opened the link. A podcast. Grainy production. Low-rent graphics. But the title hit like a punch to the ribs. Adoption for optics. Billionaires and their charity children. He didn't even need to listen. The thumbnail was a photo, him and Zoey, holding hands at a park. She was mid-laugh, looking up at him like the sun rose behind his shoulders. He hit play anyway. The voice that came through was sharp, cynical. A woman's voice. "You know what's sad? When the ultra-wealthy adopt black children to boost their public image. Little girls placed in mansions they don't belong in, all for a nice Christmas card or a legacy grant." Malcolm hit pause. He didn't get angry. He got quiet. He closed the laptop slowly and stared out the window at the rain. He wasn't offended for himself. But the idea that Zoey's place in their family, that her identity, could be reduced to a stunt? That cut deep. He didn't sleep much that night. By morning, he had a plan. Not a press release. Not legal threats. He didn't want a war. He wanted a truth. So, over breakfast, he looked at Zoey across the table, syrup smudged on her cheek, hair in a frizzy halo, and asked, "Hey, Zoe, would you want to tell our story?" She blinked. "Like, in a book?" "No. Like in a video. Just us. Talking about what makes this real. Do I get to wear my I'm the Boss t-shirt?" He smiled. "You can wear a crown if you want." 2 days later, they filmed it in the living room. No script. No music. Just them on the couch. Zoey swung her legs and said, "I love my dad because he smells like coffee and hugs, and he listens when I talk too much." Malcolm smiled. "And I love Zoey because she reminds me who I am, and makes me better." The video was posted to the Langston Foundation's page. By the next morning, it had over 800,000 views. And the top comment, "I don't know them, but I believe every word." So did the world. And most importantly, so did Zoey. The video changed something. Not just out there. In the comments, in the inboxes, in the quiet messages from strangers thanking them for being honest. It changed something in Zoey. For the first time, she wasn't just part of the story. She owned it. At school, she walked a little taller. She raised her hand more in class. She even corrected her teacher, politely, when her name was mispronounced. "It's Zoey," she said with a small smile. With a long E. Like tree. And something in her classmates shifted, too. She wasn't just the quiet girl from the big house anymore. She was Zoey Reeves. The girl who made a video with her dad that made people cry in a good way. One afternoon, after school, she climbed into Malcolm's car and said, "I want to do it again." "Do what again?" he asked. "Tell stories. Not about us, about kids like me." Kids who feel invisible. Malcolm looked at her through the rear-view mirror. She wasn't asking for permission. She was telling him who she was becoming. That night, they sat in the den, sketching ideas on a whiteboard. Zoey named it the Lion Project, a space for kids to share their stories, their art, their dreams. No one gets to feel small here, she said, circling the name in purple marker. Malcolm nodded. He didn't say much, but he thought about the little girl who once made a list of rules to keep from being abandoned. And now, she was writing a mission, not to stay hidden, but to help others be seen. It started with an email, a simple invitation from the Washington State Youth Empowerment Council. They were holding their annual summit at the local civic center, and one of the organizers had seen Zoey's video. Would she consider speaking? Malcolm read the email twice before showing it to her. You don't have to say yes, he said. It's a big deal. A big crowd. Zoey looked at the message, then looked at him. Will you be there? Front row, he said without hesitation. She nodded. Then I'll do it. The auditorium was packed. Rows of folding chairs filled with middle schoolers, high schoolers, teachers, and parents. There were banners on the wall, Speak Loud, Stand Tall, and Your Story Matters. Malcolm sat near the front, hands folded, heart pounding harder than it ever did in a boardroom. Zoey waited behind the curtain, holding a small note card and her lion plushie tucked under her arm. She wore her favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny sunflowers stitched at the hem. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage, her sneakers squeaking softly on the polished wood. She looked smaller than she felt. Then the spotlight hit, and she took a breath. My name is Zoey Reeves, she said, and I used to think that being quiet made me safe. A hush fell over the crowd. I thought if I didn't ask for too much, or talk too loud, or take up too much space, maybe people would let me stay. Maybe they'd love me. She glanced down, then back up. But I was wrong. Her voice didn't shake. It held. I don't have to disappear to be worthy. And if you've ever felt like that, like you're too much or not enough, I want you to know, your voice belongs here. The applause didn't explode. It swelled, slow and steady like something healing in real time. Backstage, Malcolm waited. When she stepped down, she ran to him and threw her arms around his neck. I was so scared, she whispered. He pulled her in tighter. You were brave anyway. And she was. Because bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's standing in your truth with your voice turned all the way up. The video of Zoey's speech went online the same evening. Posted by the Youth Empowerment Council on their social media page, it wasn't slick or polished. Just a single camera angle and a microphone that popped slightly when she said the word, safe. But none of that mattered. By the next morning, it had over 60,000 views. By the end of the week, over 400,000. Messages started pouring in. From kids in Spokane, Tacoma, Olympia. Some were in foster care. Some weren't. Some were just kids who felt invisible in their own homes, classrooms, or communities. One message stood out. I'm 12. I thought I was the only one scared to speak. Your words helped me tell my mom how I really feel. Thank you, Zoey. When Malcolm read that one aloud at dinner, Zoey's fork paused midair. She told her mom, she said, eyes wide. Malcolm nodded. Because of you. Zoey didn't say anything for a while. Just stared at her plate like it had suddenly become something sacred. That weekend, she sat at the kitchen table with colored index cards spread across the surface. On each one, a word. Brave. Safe. Heard. Home. These are for the Lion Project, she told Malcolm. I want every kid who shares their story to get a word. Like, something they can hold. He smiled. What about a pin? Something they wear. Zoey lit up. Yes, a lion pin. But soft. Not sharp. They ordered the first batch that night. Felt lion pins with little gold thread manies. Each one would come with a handwritten card from Zoey. Not because she owed anyone anything, but because she knew what it felt like to speak into silence, and finally hear something echo back.